Today, we have the pleasure of being with Dr. Hope Seidel. Dr. Seidel is a pediatrician. This second part of her career, she has a practice called Parent with Hope. And so she's serving as a parenting coach to help all of us. And I reached out to her just because I have two teenage boys and I'm at the stage where we're looking at colleges and kind of preparing to launch. And I think this is such an amazing transition for parents and for adolescents. And so I need all the help I can get. So I'm really excited to see you, Dr. Seidel. Thank you so much for being with us.
I'm so touched that you wanted me to come, and I'm excited to hopefully provide some mindset shifts and some insight into a different way to think about this time. Very exciting and also a stressful time in your kids' lives. I have been asked, as she said, to come today and reflect kind of on what it means to launch our kids and to talk through any other topics that anybody has that's listening around this eventful year. I did retire from my pediatric practice in December of 2023 to make a broader impact on children's wellness, because I strongly believe that wellness begins at home. And I'm currently working as a one-on-one parenting coach, primarily for high-achieving parents, where we just take a deep dive into the parts of parenting that seem tricky. I take care of kids and all parents and who have kids of all ages. But in full transparency, I have two teenage or young adult kids myself. My daughter is 22, my son almost 23, and my son is a sophomore in college currently. And I also want to share, just for perspective, that I'm also a single parent. I also have a son who has a chronic illness that he has epilepsy and could be life-threatening for him at any moment. And they also lost their dad in 2020 after a really long and difficult and public and painful battle with addiction. And I'm not saying that to in any way garner sympathy, but just to help you know that the lens that I have around parenting in this time really does come not only from my experience with parents and that I coach and parents that I've seen in my practice, but also from the work I've done to launch independent adults. Both my kids went to Gary Academy. My daughter's living in New York. My son lives away in college, and they're two completely different children, but they are both fairly independent and resilient and wise. And I want to share with you what I've learned from parenting them, and also what I've made that mean about my own parenting. So we often decide how good we are as parents from the way our kids turn out. And even though I'm really proud of the kids that I have, I like to think like I shepherd them, that they've become, it's not the reason that I'm a good parent. And for me, being a great mom means a lot of different things. To me, being a really good parent involves working full time and breastfeeding and not breastfeeding and sleep training my daughter at 6 weeks of age. I tell my kids the truth. I say I'm sorry to them. I let them be sad. I make them work both in high school and in college and pay for their recreational activities. I'm really good at letting them fail. I did pay for college. I also bought them a car. Frankly, after they wrecked them, I bought them another one. I don't rescue them from most of the things that life hands them. And I hold them accountable for a lot of boundaries. And I do many of these things imperfectly, but that is the goal in general. And this list is important for you to see because it may not resonate to you at all. You might think that breastfeeding till a year is important, or that working full time is not a great parent, or who would sleep train their kid at 6 weeks, or who wants their kids to be sad. Like, I don't get to decide for you what feels like you being a great parent. But the first thing I'd really love for you guys to do is to change your narrative that being a good parent somehow is defined by your other people in your life, because we all get to decide what it means for us. And we don't want to have our kids be accountable for our feelings of adequacy as parents. That's not their job. It's not their job to make us feel like good parents. And then your kids don't have to do anything in order for you to feel okay. Hopefully that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So let me first say that there is a really big gap between what a child can do and what parents and society expects of them. And this goes two ways, right? In our achievement culture, we expect so much of our kids, sometimes even beyond what their capacity is, certainly beyond what was expected of us. Even if you had a tiger parent, the odds of you being expected as much that we expect from our kids in this day and age is unlikely. And parents ask me all of the time, like, why is there such a like so much mental illness in this group of children? And there are a lot of answers for that. But in 2018, there was a report done by Robert Wood Johnson that named the biggest environmental conditions that negatively impact adolescent wellness. And they were poverty, trauma, discrimination, and the excessive pressure to excel. Living with toxic stress for our kids is killing them. And many experts have said in some form or the other that we mortgage their childhood as we prepare them for life. And there have also been many studies that have confirmed that what places a child at highest risk at clinically high levels of anxiety, depression, and as you might imagine, that worries me about substance abuse, is growing up with an environment of unrelenting pressure. And this isn't just coming from us. It's coming from teachers. It's coming from coaches. It's coming from social media, and it's coming from college. So I digress. So we overestimate what our kids can do sometimes. And then when it comes to life skills, we grossly underestimate what our kids can do or should do. We pressure them to excel in this kind of hyper competitive world, thinking that that's the way to success. Frankly, we're teaching them that's the way to success. And then we sometimes don't teach them the basic skills that truly do fuel the capacity for self-efficacy. We interfere with their building blocks of feeling self-confidence. And self-efficacy is this belief in your ability to complete your own tasks, to reach a goal, to be able to manage your own situations. And so what are some of the skills that we need to be thinking about that we may or may not be doing to position our kids to be successful adults? Handling failure and disappointment, taking instructions from a leader or a boss or a coach, particularly one that they don't like, communicating what they need, asking for help. I mean, think about how many times it's even hard for us, especially as women, to admit that we're having a hard time and asking for help, and to advocate for themselves, which many schools are doing a pretty good job of teaching their kids. Regulating their feelings and how to express them in a socially appropriate way. Our kids need to understand how to manage money and have financial literacy. How often do you teach your kids how much you make, how much things cost, what the cost is of college, what their expectations are to save and prepare themselves for the adult world? They need to know how to maintain their cars, to pick up their medication, to make their own appointments. They need to learn how to do things that they don't want to do and then do them well, and to set boundaries, including those with sex and alcohol, physical touch, things that are really, really important, not only for our girls, but primarily because they're at higher risk at times. And then, of course, time management, which, as most of you know, is tricky for our teens because they don't have a fully developed frontal lobe. And frontal lobe is the place in our brain that's critical for planning, executing, thinking ahead, thinking of consequences. These are skills that we need to constantly be building in our kids. And so you want to ask yourself, how are you inoculating your kids for life? How often do you get in the way of these things? Sometimes if there's a coach or a teacher that they don't like, how often do you advocate for them? When your kids are really communicating something poorly, how often do you ask them to redo it so that they can learn the language to be able to better express themselves? When they scream at you, how much do you punish the behavior as opposed to saying, I can see you're angry. I don't get spoken to that way. Can you help me understand what you need in a way that is more productive? I don't always say it that well, just so you know. My son, as I mentioned, has a chronic illness. I never fill his epilepsy medications. It's not because I don't know how, it's because they're not my medications. And I don't want him to be an adult that forgets. He has to take it every day to prevent him from dying. And so I need him to really understand that responsibility. And we work towards that independence over the past several years. There was a really interesting, one of the best ways to tell how well kids in college are prepared for this when your kid starts college, if you don't have one that has, is to get on one of those parenting websites parenting Facebook groups that they have that's attached to the college. And you will be astonished by how many things are put on there that parents are trying to handle for their kids. Or maybe you won't. But last week, the website for my son's college, a woman posted this. My daughter has a full schedule and she has very little time to take care of her laundry. Is there a service that picks up from the dorms? I'd like to get that for her so she's not burdened by it. And although, as you might imagine, I answered in a very compassionate way that she might want to consider that that's a skill set she's going to need to be able to handle when life gets busy, you would be shocked how many people gave her suggestions. like 40 of different services that they either have used or knew about because they felt so bad that her daughter couldn't navigate both. So today it's worth kind of thinking through some of the answers to the questions that you haven't considered to this time. There's a couple of things that I want you to be thinking about. Okay. And these questions can bring you closer to what feels true for you as a good parent, that feels better for you in this moment, so that you can take something with you from this and think about how to be more intentional as you're launching an adult. First of all, what is your long game for the skills you want them to have? And are you building that skill? I want them to be independent. Am I inserting myself? I want them to manage money well. Am I giving them a budget and teaching them how to be accountable when money runs out? Those sorts of things. What does being an adult mean to you? And is what you're teaching in alignment with that? And if not, why? Do you actually want to let them go or not? And if not, why? Sometimes we really define sort of our role in our family unit, especially as mothers, as being it's important that we feel needed, or that our identity is really wrapped up into the part of motherhood that we've been invested in for the last 18, 16, 20 years. And letting them go can feel challenging. We don't really want to, because it sometimes leaves us with a void that we're not prepared for. It's also critical that we don't put our kids in charge of that responsibility. Do you really like it when they need you? Do you want them to need you? Sometimes you insert yourself because when they ask you, it makes you feel relevant. Do you consider their life thus far your accomplishment or theirs? How much of what they do are you patting yourself on the back for? And therefore, if things aren't going well, how much do you make that mean about you as well? Along those lines, do you feel their failures or their potential failures are your responsibility? And do you think that the way you love them is by helping or rescuing them? Is that the narrative that you tell yourself, that that's what loving parents do? Does it feel like you're not loving them if you save them? And finally, a really great question to ask yourself is that what is the goal of college for you? Do you think it's important that they have social interactions? Do you have a requirement that they finish in 4 years? Is it to teach them financial accountability? Do you care if they get a degree that's useful? Really clean up what you value as a college experience so that you don't insert yourself in the way as well. I think we have spent a lot of years being on top of all these things. And most of the time, our intention is that we're loving them or preparing them or preventing their failure or just what I call a fancy kind of help. But it's critical that everybody understands that there's a difference between our intention as parents and our impact. There's a disconnect between what we want and what we teach. And the main reason we do that is because we're afraid. We're afraid that failure is going to feel uncomfortable. We don't want them to not do well. We don't want them for a zillion reasons to have discomfort. And most of us give lectures ahead of time instead of allowing our kids to have certain experiences, because the risk, especially in this generation, feels so big, which makes perfect sense. The stakes are high for our children. But when you think about it through the lens of teaching your kid to drive, you would never just give them a lecture on driving and then put them on the road and say, you did the study part, just go ahead, call me if you need me, right? There's a part of driving that requires the experience of it, where we're sitting with them and praying we don't die and teaching them in real time. It's probably the worst part about my parenting was when I taught my kids to drive, right? But it's that experience that's absolutely critical to their successful capacity to navigate a vehicle. And so when you think about life in that way, you can start to remember that, life skills, most life skills aren't taught, they're experienced. So how can we prepare our kids? It actually is not particularly easy, but it is a simple, very simple shift. Okay. We need to change our mindset and value different things. Can you value pain? Can you value failure? Can you value disappointment? I'll tell you a very quick story. When my daughter went to Chapel Hill, she had been at a private school before then, very used to sort of connecting with her teachers and advocating for herself. When she thought that they didn't understand what she actually meant by a question on an exam, she sometimes could massage that conversation in order to get a couple points back. And she wanted to go to Carolina. And I said to her, I don't care where you go, you get to choose, but you're very used to this skill. And at Chapel Hill, that's not going to go well. You're going to be in big classes and you're not going to be able to use that ability. And to make a long story short, she took econ and she didn't do well on a test. And she said, "Oh, don't worry, I'm going to go talk to the TA." You might imagine how that went if you went to a large public school. There was not anything happening that was going to be changing her grade at all. And I watched this train kind of roll off the tracks as I'm watching her. She never had gotten a bad grade in high school, and she failed econ her first semester at Chapel Hill. And I really had a lot of moments where I could have advocated for getting a tutor, or had she considered this. I did not say a word. At one point, I think I did say to her, if there's a tutor and it costs money, I'd be happy to pay for it. Other than that, I didn't say anything. I could see the train literally going off of the tracks. And at the end of the whole thing, when she got her grade, she said to me, "I have no one to blame but myself." Yes, I value accountability. I value failure. We never had that day again. She understood fully what she needed to learn. And it was an important lesson that she could only learn by experience. When my kids have these moments where life is 50-50 and there is a part of life that feels uncomfortable or difficult or challenging, I'm legitimately glad that they're having it, and I'm right there beside them to witness it. They need to know that these moments are okay so that they have the capacity for resilience when life hands them that stuff later on. Getting out of their way is loving. And I would invite you to reframe your mindset about that if that's not already something you do. It's actually fairly respectful. It says to your kid, "I know that you can handle this, and I am right here with you." The truth is that as human beings, we generally control what we don't trust. And if you don't believe that your kids can launch effectively in college and you're sending them, you need to work hard on that belief now. Because our kids need to borrow our mindset. They need to borrow our beliefs when things are hard. And more than that, our kids really need to be there for themselves. Their mental health depends on it. They need to look inside of themselves and notice what really matters to them and trust themselves. That is the anchor of self-efficacy. The cost of trusting our kids is that we must let go of their choices. We need not micromanage their schedules in college, their grades, their tutors, their friendships, their anything, unless they're in some horrible situation where they really can't get out of it, or it's an unhealthy or toxic situation. Because if we don't let go of their choices, our kids only have a couple of options. One of them is to people please us, take them farther away from themselves, or for them to resist us. And the impact of both of those things, if we're trying to control them, is they don't learn what feels right for them. Or worse, they may transfer this guidance to someone who isn't us, who doesn't have the same values that we have. We interfere with their growth in that moment. And here's a tough idea reframe. Nobody knows better than your kid what's right for them than them. Most parents do not believe this thought. And there's like, really, I think I know what's better for my kid than them. But if you don't believe that, I want you to just question for yourself why that is. Because the truth is it isn't our job to tell our kids who to be or what's right to do. It's to help them reveal that for themselves. And it is really difficult to let go of this, especially if like over this insidious amount of time, like in the beginning of our kids' childhood, we're spending so much time literally keeping them alive. And then slowly over time, we're supposed to be letting all these things go. But the things we need to let go seem so much more important than whether or not they get the red cup or the blue cup at lunch. It feels huge. And most of us feel like it's more of an ending than it is a beginning. But our strongest parenting is when we're teaching our kids more effectively, not what to think about things, but how to consider things. It's okay to teach our kids that they can work to achieve hard things. And many of you have done that to get them into this place before they're going to college. But let's not forget to teach them also other things, like pay attention to your body when it's tired. It's okay to rest. Sometimes there's a cost to overriding our needs physically. It's important to remember that overachieving doesn't always equal mental health, which I teach my son on the regular, that we don't have to love everything that we do, that failure is a natural, important moment in our life, and it's not an indication that we're not working hard enough. It's a bridge to where we're going. And we can talk about this more specifically if people have questions, but remember too that having your kids do chores and do things around that house teaches work ethic. Failure teaches resilience. Struggle fuels self-efficacy and growth. Contributing to your home teaches them gratitude. It also teaches them how to live with a roommate. If your kids aren't helping much around the house, especially if some of you aren't right here with seniors, but you have younger kids that are listening to this later. And rescuing your kids from negative emotion interferes with their capacity to deal with them. This reminds me of what's going to happen to some of you who have kids go to college. Your kid's going to call you from either far away or what feels far away, and they're going to unload and dump on you 1,000 things that are wrong. Okay. And one of the ways we get in the way of our kids' emotional work is that we will spend a long time staying up all night worrying about all the things that they just told us. Thinking about it, we should probably call someone. They need a tutor. That roommate did look kind of freaky when we picked her up. All of the things that we're going to tell ourselves that it's a problem. Maybe we shouldn't have done that major. I probably can help her figure it out, whatever it is, right? And then what will happen is you'll call them the next day and they'll be like, oh, I'm totally fine. Yeah, I figured it out. What will happen when we rush in and jump in to solve their problems is that you get in the way of your kids' ability to think through a plan for themselves. And then they become dependent on your advice, which you might like, but doesn't serve them. So I always like to think about asking my kids more questions than telling them answers. Okay, what are you going to do? Is the most common question I ask when they come to me with something, just to see if they've thought of something at least. And sometimes what they're thinking about isn't even what I was worried about. Kids feel and then act. Their frontal lobe is not online most of the time, and they have a physical sensation in their body, and then they do something without any regulation. I'm sure I don't have to tell most of you that. And if you want to build your kids' capacity to think, to really start to stimulate the part of their brain that is still evolving until they get out of college, is we have to teach them how to think. We have to ask a curious question so that they can practice that skill. And if you don't know what to ask when they unload on you, there's no rush. There's no rush. Very few of things are an emergency in general. So just pause and then ask yourself the question, what do I want to teach in this moment? Okay, what do I want to teach in this moment? Who do I want to be for my kid in this moment for my kid? Who do I want to be? Do I want to rescue them? Do I want to help guide them? Many parents just want to give so much advice. I had a mom say to me after a talk last week, my kid doesn't want to talk to me. All she wants to do is talk to her sister. And I said, she doesn't want to have any conversation with you. And she said, no. And I said, when you talk to them, how often do you teach a lesson? And she said, every time. Like, I have so many things to teach them. Our kids do not need a lesson every time we have a conversation with them. Sometimes they just want to figure it out for themselves. Sometimes they want to be witnessed. And if they think you have an agenda every time they talk to you, the calls, which already are sporadic in college, will get farther and farther apart. It creates disconnect with our kids when we don't respect them enough to come up with their own answers. So I work one-on-one with parents all the time to sort of take some of these concepts and the parts of our parenting that feel kind of tricky individually for each of us one-on-one. Of course, you guys can write down, that's my website right there. And I would be so grateful to answer any questions from you, Dr. Watson, or anybody else who has them, or anything that you want to clarify logistically that I can be helpful with.
Thank you. This was amazing. And I love how much of a straight shooter you are. I just think that so many of us, like you're saying, as women have sort of kind of put a concept of our own self-worth, of our own purpose in what our kids' success is, and how that can kind of get in the way of our kids really being able to make mistakes on their own, to fail on their own, and all those lessons that are part of becoming an adult. So that was fantastic. I really appreciated that. We do have a question. This person is saying that she really likes the resources you've shared. She has questions about advice for folks who might be sharing custody. She shares her kids with someone who she's describing as a malignant narcissist. She's been navigating this for 12 years, and her daughters are in high school and doing well. She's got them in therapy. but putting independence into practice, allowing them, for example, to learn about budgeting, prioritizing, allowing them to fail, is often counteracted by the other parent. And she's trying to be as authentic and loving as she can be, apologizing when she's wrong, articulating when boundaries are out of place. But she feels like the other parent is kind of bailing the kids out when she's maybe trying to give the kids an opportunity to have some growth. So that sounds really challenging to have to navigate with two separate households. So maybe you've got some thoughts on when folks are really struggling with co-parenting.
Oh my gosh, I'll try and be brief. Okay, so let me first say that that does sound really hard, and I agree with you, and just offer some empathy. I don't mean to imply that being in separate homes is easy, but it is true that you don't have to be co-parenting and be divorced in order for parenting to be tricky. Most parents come to parenting with different agendas, and we come from different childhoods, and we have different values. And let me also say that if you're in a co-parenting situation where you have extricated yourself from what sounds like a difficult dynamic, whether it's pathology that's diagnosed by a psychiatrist that is always going to be there, or just difficult, our kids do not have the option to extricate themselves as easily from the parent that they're with. And I have two friends that I talk about this with a lot, and many clients. And I see our role as parents to be the parent that is the healthiest version of ourselves so our kids know the difference. If it is true, like I'll use my own example, like my husband was an active addiction. I didn't want my kids to have that day. I didn't want them to be, I didn't want them to see that he was suffering. And when I committed radically to just showing up, sometimes that looks like having more boundaries or being the parent that doesn't do all the fun things and all of it. I just decided to commit that I was going to be the stable parent that had a really strong why for all of my boundaries and allowed my kids to not like it, allowed them to be happy when he bought them a BB gun or whatever the story was that he needed to fill whatever his bucket was. Our kids always know who the healthy parent is. Kids have a wise sense of what feels good in their bodies. And if you can be a parent, not at the expense of making your co-parent look bad, but teaching your kids to trust what feels good to them and what doesn't, then they will always take that with them as they navigate the world that's full of people who do all sorts of terrible things. So I don't think that it's necessary to compete with a parent that is showing up differently than you. It's not true that that doesn't happen when you're still married. And at the same time, if we're always trying to explain why the other person's doing it wrong, we're not showing up as our best parenting. We need to let other people who they're going to be and teach our kids, listen, this is the thing. My highest priority is that you turn into someone who can always get out of a marriage if it doesn't feel good, or always take care of yourself financially, that you always understand how much things cost. And your dad gets to do what he wants to do with his money and his philosophy. But I'm never going to give you money to go to Sephora and spend zillions of dollars on makeup, because that isn't the way the world might work for you. And I'm committed to that. And you're allowed to be mad about it. So I don't think it's necessary to make up for a parent's perceived or true shortcomings that's not your partner. But I do think it's worth a radical commitment to thinking about your own intentions, who you want to be in relationship with your kid, and being honest about that. Because they're going to need a parent. If he really is a malignant narcissist, your kids are going to need to understand how to set boundaries. They're going to need to understand what's right and wrong. They're going to need to recognize when they're manipulated. And that cannot come from him. It has to come from you. Is that helpful?
The person just said thank you. So yeah, I think that's fantastic. And unfortunately, they're probably going to encounter other malignant narcissists in the world. And so maybe not the most fun way to learn how to handle that, but really important lesson.
Yeah.
You've talked about money a fair amount, and I really appreciate that, giving kids some sort of financial literacy, giving kids a sense of responsibility. I'd love it if we could talk about money in terms of college. I've got an 11th grader and I'm not independently wealthy. And so the kind of conversation we've had up to this point has been kind of, hey, we've saved X and this is what you've got in your college fund bucket. And if you decide you want to go to a really fancy school, that's totally cool and we support you, but you're probably going to take on some debt for that. And that's your choice. And then hey, you might want to write a few extra essays and see if you can get some scholarships, and you might get some merit-based aid. And we don't know what that looks like right now. What was really interesting, so I thought I tried to give kind of like balanced a little bit. That was my try. My kids said to me, well, maybe this, lesser state school that's not super competitive might be the best thing for our family because of money. And I thought, whoa. So I just passed on my anxiety about the money. Somehow it didn't land quite how I wanted it to. So maybe, a lot of us are talking to our kids about money, and college is expensive. So I'm just wondering if you've got some different language so that maybe I could try this again without maybe sharing some of my anxiety about the money, which wasn't helpful in that instance. Does that make
Well,
sense?
kind of. I mean, was it coming from a place of anxiety when you told him that, or was it coming from a place of telling the truth?
I think I'm probably a little bit of both. I think my mom let me go to the fancy private college, and I probably spent her retirement. And
Yeah.
I have a lot of conflicting feelings about that, because
Yeah.
now that I'm in this stage, I can see that that was a real sacrifice for her. It's also a real gift, right? But it's complicated. So, when he said that, like, hey, that might be best for our family, I said, I really want you to go to the place that feels the best for you. I want you to know that we will, we're going to support you as much as we can. And it might be worth taking on some debt for. But I just didn't know if you had kind of other thoughts or other language, because I think a lot of families are probably having similar conversations around colleges.
Well, I don't really know. I mean, let me just first say that out of all of the ways that we show up in the world where different values are most obvious, it's around money, right? Our thoughts about money, how much is too much or not enough, how we should be spending our money, what ways that we model spending in our own home, what you and I value in terms of education versus not. And I think this may not have been true for you, but this happens with other parents. So I'll just say it this way, is that we want to think about when we're having conversations about anything, but particularly around money, are we trying to manipulate their lens on how they think about their choices or not? Because if you don't lead with, go wherever you want, we're all going to figure this out, debt's normal, you don't have to be worried about the debt, but I want you to think about it, then we lead with that. If we're like, you know what, college might not be worth this big of an investment, you could get just as good of you know, a college at a school that isn't private, then why are we letting them look? So I think it's totally appropriate to be honest with your kids about what you're willing to pay for and what you're not. I can just speak for myself. Like I told my kids they could go wherever they wanted to college. I had saved enough for them to go, but I don't pay for any of their recreation, none. And I make them get a job to figure it out. My son worked in the summer. My daughter worked during college. I did not do that. I don't even know what I did with my time. My parents just kept giving me money. I don't even understand how I turned out to have a work ethic, but that was important to them. And each kid is different. My daughter really needed a job to stay focused. My son is so involved in school, and I think that's important for his mental and growth. It's so good for him that I don't really want him to work in college. So everybody's going to have a different answer to that. I think it's never a problem if your kids understand that that money isn't abundant for every choice that they have. It's real. It's realistic. I never think it's a problem to tell them the truth. So you might be interpreting that he's feeling anxious about it because maybe it's striking a chord in you that you're thinking, oh, I am nervous. Maybe I made him nervous. But the truth is if you don't have enough money saved up for him to go to an $80,000 a year school, he needs to know that now, because that's not the only cost. It's getting him back and forth from wherever he goes out west. It's a lot of other things. And so, you might not be able to have X, Y, and Z if you go to this school is a very appropriate conversation to have.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I,
I did
I
work study, and it was fine. I mean, it was fine. But yeah, that was what my mom did. Like, she got the tuition, but then books, everything else was on me. And then I
yeah.
kind of figured it out, right? And I think it was a good lesson to have.
Totally. And so it doesn't have to be that it's a problem for him, but I think our kids don't get enough information sometime. And then we're resentful that they're not getting certain grades because we spent so much money. Like, I paid for the school and no attachments to it. I said, you have 4 years, you do with your degree what you want. I expect you to get a job afterwards. I'm not, COVID notwithstanding, right? I said, I have certain things that I think are college are for, and I don't micromanage any of it after that. I don't ask them what their grades are. I don't try and make sure they're doing a good job. Like, this is their life, and this is the gift I'm giving them. And this might not be what everybody here is doing, and that's so fine. It doesn't matter at all. Just tell them the truth. because our kids can't be expected to understand what they're not aware of.
One of the themes I keep hearing is letting your kids fail, letting letting your kids have the experience so they can figure out how to manage a difficult relationship, how to all of these life skills. And so another thing that I'm anticipating is I'm going to be like the petulant girlfriend. Like, I'm going to want to reach out to him and check on him because I want to make sure he's mentally well and he's safe. But on the other hand, I need to give him a lot of space, right? To have those experiences, to maybe have a roommate he doesn't love, to figure out how to figure, all the things that could happen. So can you talk a little bit about having enough contact to check in and make sure your kid is safe without maybe, sending them 3 texts a day and giving them that space that they need?
Okay, so this is my opinion. Okay, I just want to be super clear on that. Um, I think the less contact, the better when your kids first start college. They are learning to navigate. It's a very stressful time. I don't mean like don't be available to them, but I mean like if you're reaching out to your kid to meet your need, I would not. If you're reaching out to them to be available to meet their needs, even though you don't need to rescue them from everything, as I implied earlier, that's 100% of the time. So if my kid calls me at 11 o'clock, I mean, I have my phone, I pick it up. Obviously, like I try really hard to be available when it works for them, or I'll just check in from time to time and send a funny meme or some inspirational quote so that they roll their eyes. Or from time to time, I'll send a little text like loving you. No expectation that they're going to reach out, but so they know, hey, I'm right here. No worries. This is hard. I got you. But not like, hey, why don't you call me? I need you. That's about taking our kids, outsourcing our emotional kind of health to our kids when they're already navigating so much.
Right.
The other thing is that if we're getting a lot of feedback from our kids that things are hard and we're already believing it's going to be hard for them, it's going to be really challenging and tricky for us to be able to support them because we're like, yeah, this was going to be hard going all the way to Utah. I don't know how you're doing it. We feed into their doubt, which does not help them build the resilience they need to know that they can do it. So I think the most important thing, Dr. Watson, is just to check in with your intention. Am I reaching out with them because of something I need? And then even if I do that, I always own it. Hey, your mom is having a breakdown today. I need you to tell me you love me. But I don't say, why aren't you calling me? I need to hear from you. I'm paying for school. The least you can do is call me on a Sunday. It doesn't make my kids want to call me. It makes, and so that's kind of the difference, is just sort of what your intention is when you reach out.
I think that's a fantastic reframe and just a really important pause, right? Right. We allegedly have a developed frontal lobe at this point, right? And so can we check in? Hey, what's my intention with this communication? Is this really going to get what I want?
Yes.
And if I really need to call a friend, then I need to call a friend and let my kid be. And it's okay to have those feelings. I think a lot of us, this is a really tough transition.
Yes.
But let's not expect the kid to meet that emotionally. Let the kid be the kid, right? Someone said to me once, like, um, the parent is always supposed to be the parent and not expect the kid to be the parent.
Yes.
And my parents got divorced when I was really little. And my mom was really having a hard time, and that's totally fine. But I think that's a good thing to remember, is that parents are supposed to be parents and not expect the kid to parent them or the kid to support them. The kid should get to be a kid.
Yeah, 100%. And our kids will typically tell us that, but I feel strongly that I don't want my kids to contact me because they're feeling bad for me or they're worried about me. Like naturally, when my last went away and I was by myself here, like my son he's the kind of kid that would worry. And I literally had to explain to him, I am fine. I'm a grown adult. I can handle it. And at the same token, what you mentioned earlier is so true. I cried when my daughter was at Chapel Hill. I could have walked there. I mean, honestly, I could have. But I cried till about Halloween. And my son would come home and he'd be like, are you crying again? And I just would say to him, yeah, it's an ending for me and I'm sad and I'm going to be fine. I just need to process it all the way through and you do not need to be worried about it. It's normal for you to have feelings of loss and grief. It does come and go. I didn't feel like some parents feel like they're just so happy that their nest is empty. I felt I felt grief. And it is better on the other side. I love my relationship with my adult kids, but just like when they went to kindergarten or other big moments in your kids' lives, it's eventful. And so it's really important that you take care of yourselves, get support from Dr. Watson or from a therapist or from even better, a really good friend going through the same thing, or me, but not to put that burden on your kids. That is not their job.
Absolutely. What other things do you see, like when you're working with parents, where you just sort of feel like, okay, we see this pattern, kind of the helicopter parent, the parent's been really managing a lot of things. Like many of us, maybe that might have been kind of our model for how we express love. And so now we may be needing to rewind that a little bit and rethink that. I don't feel like I've necessarily helicoptered my kids. Like I've never done my kids' homework, but I've seen women come in and she describes it as our homework. And I'm like, girlfriend, you are not in the fourth grade. Like, how is the kid going to get to the fifth grade if you're doing their homework? Right. So any other like thoughts on common kind of traps parents are putting themselves in?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind, I had two things I thought of that I wanted to talk about that I don't want to forget that I just wrote down. But one of the things that kind of comes to mind as you're saying this is just, uh, and this question sort of will help bring it to the forefront, is just kind of like, is this a me problem or a them problem? Like when my kid is having a struggle, am I having a hard time with it or are they having a hard time with it? Because what we do, a lot of parents will say to me when I do an intake and our work together, like, I'll ask, like, what are your values, your priorities, the kind of adult you're trying to raise? And they'll often use the word resilient. And resilience doesn't come from being able to do tons of things, it comes from failing at something and knowing you can get through it. And so you can't have both. And so when I'm met with a situation that my brain wants to tell me is uncomfortable, I always check in with myself and think, is this about me or them? And is this necessary for their capacity to grow into the adult I want them to be? And then like, I don't even have to resist it. I can just welcome it in a way that's just like, oh, thank God we got this over with. Sometimes I have parents that come in and their kids will be making really good choices that they think are really good choices until they hit a certain age. And then they're like, I just can't believe this happened. I can't believe that they started vaping or smoking pot or had anorexia or whatever the situation is. And I'm not like always toxically positive, but I do think like, how can this situation be an invitation for everybody's growth? How can this be perfect that it's happening under your wings where you can figure it out? And also pay attention to how much your kid is resisting you. If you have a kid that's really resisting you, sometimes it's because they're trying to tell you with poor behavior that they got this. They want you to step aside. And that's another time when taking care of yourself emotionally is important. Like, they don't need me anymore can feel really bad if that's something that is really important to you. So, most of the time, we make that a rejection. And it really has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the cost of raising independent adults. And what I wanted to also just mention, Dr. Watson, is just one of the questions I got asked when I did a similar version of this talk last week to some senior parents locally is, what are the boundaries we should have around school and around home? Like when your kids come home for college or right before they're about to go to college, you're having a lot of energy about sort of like, this is our last everything. We're not going to be together. All they want to do is be with their friends. It sometimes is a time of a lot of conflict in families. And then also when they come home from college, they're used to the kind of independence that you're not comfortable with, especially if they just left, or even that you're not comfortable with at home in general. And I just offer that it's totally appropriate to set up boundaries with your kid, especially when they come home from college, of what's allowed in your home. I know that you're probably drinking at school, and I'm not an idiot, but like, we just don't drink in my home unless you're legal. That's not a risk I'm willing to take. That's not new. I don't do that. My kids know that. We all know it's ridiculous. I know that they're drinking, and doesn't happen in my home. And so, as consistent as you can be about the boundaries in your home, I think really goes a long way to creating really positive expectations and moments when they do come home to visit. And And then before they go to school, when you're feeling a lot of loss and anticipation, just catching yourself often from time to time, thinking, okay, this is about me really feeling sad because this moment is over. My kid is allowed to have whatever experience they're going to have this summer, or these are the boundaries I need to make sure we have so that they spend time with our family or whatever. So that also comes up right before college too, which sometimes feels pretty tricky.
We have another question. So she's saying, what about a senior in high school, already accepted into a couple of colleges, and now doesn't want to do anything in high school, procrastinating till the last minute? If he has never been interested in high school, now he has even less interest. Should I every afternoon ask him about homework or let him fail?
100% you should not ask him anymore about homework at senior year. Because listen, this is information. So your son is going to have classes in college. This is a conversation to have. Your son is going to have classes in college that are required for whatever school he goes to that are, what do you call them? Like the, not basic classes, but the
Just core
core classes. Yeah, like a core curriculum that are going to be horrible, right? And so this speaks to my comments earlier about generating a capacity to do things they don't want to do. And so if he's not modeling the capacity to do things that he doesn't want to do now, he's not going to be good at that. And college is information for you. So you can set that as a boundary. Hey, I'm not going to remind you of your homework. I just want to let you know that if you don't pass high school, you're not going to college. Or if you get a certain kind of grade, I'm not paying for college. Those are all boundaries that are optional for you. Having said that, if his grades are decent, this is a very short window of time, and our kids are ending what may have been a very stressful time as they were anticipating and getting into the college that they want to. And I also think it's worth remembering, like, is it okay if he has a break? What is our urgency about? Is it about us thinking that they're not going to, is it about our fear that they're not going to be able to go to college? Is it about, we make it mean that they're lazy? Like, what are we making that mean? He legitimately might need some rest. And you holding him accountable for it is not going to do anything but create more friction. You certainly can say, these are my expectations. If we get to the end of senior year and your grades are all D's because you didn't put effort into things you didn't want to do, you are welcome to do that. But I won't be paying for college with that kind of effort, or some version of that that feels true for you. It doesn't have to be my idea. But I think both can be true. It sounds like you need a little extra time. You seem like you're really burnt out. College is over. Like, this is kind of what I'm expecting, and then let it go. But I would not be reminding a 12th grader about homework in any universe. Set a boundary for what's important for you and hold to it and let the rest go. He's a grown up.
This situation makes me think about a different conversation about, do you have any kind of modeling over thinking about a gap year? So when a kid is really strung out and really might need a mental health break, like, any thoughts on when it would be really appropriate to start that conversation of, hey, is this something you've thought about? Do you have any ideas about a gap year? What would you do with a gap year? Would that be helpful for you? Like, when would you start bringing those ideas up?
Okay, so that's a kind of hard question to answer because a gap year means different things to different people,
Okay.
right? So, for some people from privilege, this doing a gap year where we go to travel or do something exorbitant, there may be skills that we want to build in our kids, independence or getting away or taking a year off and learning differently than just in a classroom, that we may have the financial capacity to do, that I don't think missing the first year of college is a huge deal for. Maybe our kids aren't demonstrating the capacity like this child might be. I don't know the whole story, but let's just say they're not demonstrating the capacity to independently take care of things on their own, and they need to work for a year in an effort to try and commit. Some kids are been through a lot of mental health stuff, and they really are not showing that they're really particularly ready to launch, or they seem anxious, and sort of working on some of these frontal lobe skills and independent skills are something that might be best done in your home. So there's not really a one size fit all for that answer, but I would just check what the intention is about why you want them to do it, and then see if it aligns with what makes sense for your kid. I would have loved for my son to have done a gap year. He didn't need it, but I felt like he felt like he wanted to go to medical school. And I was like, you have this trajectory of all this school, like take a year. And he was just so ready to go. And I think many of our kids are really seeking that independence and wanting to get out of our homes and start to fly. And it doesn't mean that they have to do college perfectly in order to make it worth the risk of going. I mean, a lot of college is kind of a gap year. I mean, it's not, I mean, it's so much free time. I mean, it's just so different than what they're doing in college. I mean, in high school, where they have to sit in the classroom, most of them for 8 hours and not have any options. It feels like so much freedom, and they need time to figure that out. So it really depends on the kid, I think.
Yeah. This has been so helpful. You said you wrote down 2 things. Did you get through both things that you'd written down?
Yes, I just wanted to convey the part, about the summer before your kids go to college and how difficult that can be. And you said it beautifully, which is like just calling a friend and taking care of ourselves is really the best way for us to sort of navigate this time that's really tricky. And also so exciting for our kids. I mean, I posted something on my Instagram feed almost 2 years ago that's like, when I really feel sad, I look at my kids' life through their lens, right, of all that's possible instead of my lens, which is sometimes like all that's ending. And I can feel so much hope when I can look at it through what they have to look forward to. And I would recommend you do that with your kids. Like, their life is full of possibility and excitement right now, and we don't want to steal that from them while we're dealing with our own kind of emotional stuff as we figure this time out.
Well, and like when I think about my own college experience, I'm from Georgia and I went to Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. So really far away from home, really cold, really gray, a lot of dirty snow. And I didn't know anybody there. I didn't really fit in. And then socioeconomically, I also didn't fit in. So I was on financial aid, and it was a school with a lot of very privileged people.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of bumps, but I think in talking to some girlfriends that I'm still friends with from college, they were like, "Oh, you were so confident in college." I'm like, "I was? No, I wasn't." They're like, "You just come from Italy and you taking care of this baby in Italy, and you know how to do laundry and cook and all those things." And so I was like, "Well, of course I knew how to do laundry. I've been doing my own laundry since I was 10." You know what
Yes.
I mean? Like, but it just is as hard as it is to let them be so far away. I think that might be what my family needs, is to just really let him have that space.
And for him to discover what his capacity is instead of us teaching him what isn't or why he needs to do it differently. Like, our kids are going to live different lives than ours if we're doing it right. They are going to learn to trust a compass that's their own, not ours, if we're doing it right. And they are going to be exposed to things that they have to figure out how to navigate, because we won't always be there. And the better we get at providing them with that opportunity, with this soft place to land on the other side, the greater their capacity for success, in my opinion.
I just love this reframe of, what's your intention? Can we pause for a minute and think about our intention? But also, when you lengthen out that leash, the message you're sending your kid is, I'm confident in your ability to figure this out.
Yes.
You got this.
Yes.
When we pull the leash in, the
Right.
subliminal message is, you don't got this. Right. So
so good.
yeah, that hit home for me, Hope. This was so helpful, but I'm just gonna like tattoo that on my head. Like,
I do.
let the
No
leash
sticky notes.
out, because that's the message of, you got this. Because at the end of the day, I'm so proud of my kids, and I do think they really got this.
Yeah, tell them they need it, because they sometimes won't feel that way, and they're going to have to borrow your belief.
Mm-hmm. This was Ben. You have really filled up my cup. Thank you so much.
That's what I do. I love it so much. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope it was helpful to the people who get to listen to it. And I'm here anytime you want to talk about all things parenting.
All right. Thanks so much, Dr. Seidel. Have a good day.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Menopause Rescue. If today's podcast resonated with you and you want to take a deeper dive, check out my educational resources. We offer basic membership, which is an archive of over 100 videos on menopausal topics ranging from bone health to libido. We add to this archive every month, so the resource becomes richer and richer over time.